In this presentation, we will look at how Europe and the West surpassed the Middle East peoples in technology and financial growth, which is the main reason why some people in the Middle East hate America and the West today. In the previous presentation, we looked at how the Ottoman Turks had taken over the Middle East. By 1520, the Ottomans controlled Anatolia, the region between the rivers, which is Iraq today, and Egypt. The Turks also controlled Arabia. The Ottoman sultans considered themselves as custodians of the holy cities of Mecca and Medina, and the sultans took the title of caliph. They considered themselves as the successors to Muhammad. This put them in the camp of Sunni Islam. They accepted the traditional succession of caliphs from Muhammad on down. The Turks, however, did not control Persia. The high plateau that is the present nation of Iran was controlled by the Safavids, promoted Shia Islam, and we looked at the main difference between Shia and Islam in a previous episode. The main difference between Shia and Sunni Islam is that the Shias do not recognize the caliphs as the legitimate successors to Muhammad. And so the Sunni Turks fought against the Shia Persians in a series of wars in the 1500s. The Turks had a very large and a very effective army, but they could not defeat the Safavid rulers of Persia. And so the Persian highlands remained under Shia control, as it pretty much is to this day. The Turks actually had better results fighting against the Europeans. Sultan Suleiman, also known as Suleiman the Magnificent, led his Turkish army deep into Europe. They conquered Hungary and took over the capital city of Budapest. The Turks held the advantage in artillery over the Europeans. They besieged the city of Vienna, and the Europeans worried that the Muslims would conquer all of Europe. But the Turks could not conquer Vienna. After a long siege, and after the Austrians were reinforced, the Turks finally had to break camp and retreat. The Turks never penetrated European territory so far again, but their strong military still worried the Europeans. This was the situation for many years. The Turkish military power threatened Eastern Europe, but they never actually made any advances. Now, most of the sultans who followed Suleiman were not capable leaders or administrators. They lived in luxury in their capital of Istanbul, which was formerly known as Constantinople. Many of these sultans cared more for their own pleasures than for the welfare of their subjects. Now, Europe in the 1500s exploded intellectually. The Renaissance, right around 1500, launched a rebirth of learning. Nowadays, we associate the Renaissance with the great artists like Da Vinci, Michelangelo, Raphael, and a host of other great artists. But it started when Europeans began to study the classics, the great literature of the ancient Greeks and Romans. Well, it actually started when the Crusaders returned from the Middle East. They had come in contact with some of the ideas of the Muslim scholars. They brought back books, and eventually people started universities in the cathedrals of Europe. The thirst for learning led to new scientific discoveries and the inventions of new technologies, which led to more discoveries and inventions, and on, all the way up to the present day. There has been no stop to the processes that the European Renaissance unleashed. The sultans of the Ottoman Empire, however, had no interest in what Europe was doing at this time. They turned a blind eye to the new advances of the 1500s and 1600s. One reason was that the Ottomans felt that their empire was superior to the Europeans. After all, it was the Turks who had advanced deep into European territory. Another reason why the Turks held no interest for European ideas was that it wasn't part of Sharia. The things that the Europeans came up with did not advance the cause of Islam. These ideas did not come from the successors of Muhammad. They didn't come from the leaders of the Ummah, the Muslim community. So how could they be any good? As time went along, the Europeans gained the attention of the Turks. In the 1600s, Europeans developed new weapons and military tactics. The Turks attacked Vienna again in 1687, but this time the Austrian army defeated the Turks. The Europeans defeated the Turks again and again, and in 1699 the Turkish Sultan signed a treaty that gave up the territory of Hungary to the Austrians. In further wars with the Austrians and the Russians, the Turks lost more and more territory in the Balkans. The military defeats were bad for the Turks, but worse still was the economic decline. You see, the Middle East had sat in the middle of the trade routes from India and China, and Africa and Europe. They all met right there in the Middle East. But then Columbus discovered the New World. Some people today like to depict Columbus as a villain for introducing Europeans to North America and starting a chain of events that decimated the native population. The people of the Middle East might also blame Columbus for their woes. The Spaniards discovered huge deposits of silver in Mexico, which was brought over to Europe and stimulated the economy. At the same time as Columbus's discovery, the Portuguese found a way to India by going around Africa. In the 1500s, the trade routes shifted to the Atlantic Ocean. Europeans sailed to China and India, they sailed to Africa and America, and they brought stuff back to northern Europe. The cities on the North Sea, like Antwerp, became bustling ports as the goods came in from the sea and passed down through the great rivers of Germany and France into the heartland of Europe. The Turks lost much of the commercial activity that had previously brought them prosperity. That's why in 1536 the Turks signed the first of a series of economic treaties known as the Capitulations. This treaty allowed French merchants to trade in Istanbul. The French were exempted from Ottoman taxes and from following Sharia law while they were in Turkish territory. Other Europeans came to Istanbul under similar terms, and this later caused some serious problems for the Turks. Now, the real problem was that they began to trade raw material to the Europeans for manufactured products. Here is an example of why that's a bad economic principle. Let's say a miner in Egypt makes probably a few dollars a day working in the copper mines. That copper is sent to industrial nations where it returns to Egypt in the form of copper tubing in refrigerators. The miner pays hundreds of dollars for the refrigerator, which contains the copper that he mined for just a few dollars. This is the concept behind colonialism. This is where a developed industrial nation extracts raw materials from lesser developed places and puts these materials into finished products. Now, this is part of what makes capitalism operate. Now, I'm not going to take the time to explain the capitalist economic system. I don't have time for that, and I don't really fully understand it all, I think. But this is where some of the criticisms of capitalism come from. People look at the workers who make very little money, and then they look at the factory owners who make a lot of money, and they naturally feel sorry for the workers. And it's a situation that's not limited to the Middle East. It goes on all over the world. And it's what caused the English settlers in America to revolt and form their own country. Many critics of capitalism speak out from their positions as university professors, but these people had better hope that capitalism doesn't go away. It's the economic engine that fuels the universities that provides their platforms from which the critics of capitalism speak out. If people stop spending beyond their means, one of the things that will go away is the universities. But this is what has happened to the Middle East. This is one of the reasons why people feel resentment. European capitalists have come in and made huge profits while making the people of the Middle East poor. The people who do all the work don't receive very much of the rewards. I think that the people in the Middle East feel it a little more than other places, since there are reminders all over the place that the Muslims once controlled a superior civilization, one that was greater than the people who control the world now. This is a large part of why many people in the Middle East hate Americans and Europeans. This is largely what fuels terrorism. Now, of course, there's a lot of other factors, which we will look at a little bit later. But when the Europeans conquered the Middle East, they did not do it with military might, nor did they do it with a superior culture or religion. Europe has indeed conquered the Middle East, and they did it with their merchants.